Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Legal 500 and JPM webinar, Navigating Employment Trends in Serbia, Practical Guidance on Remote Working and its Associated Implications. My name is Joe Boswell. I'm head of the Legal 500's GC Powerless series, and I'll be introducing and moderating today's session. This morning, we're taking a deep dive into what you need to know about remote working and hybrid working in Serbia. What are the privacy implications in monitoring employees' work? How easy is it to onboard foreign workers to work remotely? All will be revealed. We have a fantastic panel ready to tackle today's topic. Joining us today, we have Jelena Nikolic, partner and employment law expert at JPM, Maria Puric, global head of legal at IPS Energy, Biljana Todorovic, SEE Market Head of Risk and Compliance at TMF Group, and last but not least, Lana Vukovic, Finance Director for Serbia and Croatia at DXC Technology. So first off, Jelena is going to give us an introduction to the topic as a subject matter expert, and then we're going to go into the panel session portion of the webinar in about 10-15 minutes. So please take it away, Jelena.
Thank you very much. So hello to everyone. I would first like to thank Legal 500 and you, Joe, for organizing this webinar, and of course our panelists. And I'm really looking forward for them to share their experiences on remote work. So at the beginning, we would just like to share the legal framework when it comes to organizing remote work, so to say, hybrid manner of working in the Republic of Serbia. That has become a necessity during 2020 because of the pandemic caused by the COVID-19. But even the pandemic is no longer that, so to say, serious. We still have the need, actually our clients still have the need to keep remote work in some way in their companies. When it comes to the legal obligations of the employers, the work from home as such, so remote work, is regulated by the labor law, but up until this pandemic, it has been used only for the employees who are working 100% remotely. And for those purposes, it was necessary to execute a special type of employment agreement or to execute an annex to the employment agreement if the employee was initially working from the business premises of the employer. There is also a provision in the law stipulating that the employer and the employee may agree for the employee to conduct certain part of working hours remotely, but in line with the unofficial opinion of the competent ministry, it is still necessary to regulate mutual rights and obligations of the parties by executing an annex to the employment agreement. In comparison to the standard employment agreement, this employment agreement that regulates remote work has to stipulate additional provisions regarding duration of working hours, mainly referring to the manner in which you are going to allow the employees to organize their working hours, whether they're going to work regular working hours as if they're working at the business premises, or if you're going to allow them to organize their working hours in a way that they want to, but to be available during the official business hours of the company. Also, it is necessary to stipulate the manner in which you're going to conduct the supervision over the work that employee conducts and its quality. So it is up to the employer, and again, depending on the job description of the employee, you can decide whether you're going to have daily or weekly meetings, or whether you're going to request from the employee to submit daily or weekly reports on the work that has been conducted. Another thing that needs to be regulated is the thing that refers to the means of work that are provided to the employee while he or she is working remotely. So those are usually laptops and mobile phones that are necessary for remote work. So it is necessary for the employer to provide those means of work, to install them and maintain them. That means that in case of any kind of problem with the working equipment, employee needs to report that to the employer, and the employer is the one who should bear the cost of repair of those means of work. Since the employees are working from home or actually working remotely, they might have additional expenses regarding the, for example, internet connection or electricity. And that is why the law stipulates that employers need to stipulate the amount of compensation that is going to be paid to the employees for this purpose. What is problematic is the fact that you cannot determine precisely what is the amount of electricity that someone spent for private purposes and what is the amount of electricity they spent for business purposes. And that is why we usually advise our clients to stipulate some flat amount that is going to be paid by day or by a month of remote work. Again, it depends on the manner that you're regulating this issue. And of course, if there are any additional rights and obligations that should be regulated, you are supposed to regulate them by the annexed employment agreement. Also, what is our suggestion is for these, so to say, key points to be in the annex. But that still allows you the possibility to regulate remaining rights and obligations regarding remote work by a general act, whether that is going to be an employment rulebook or any other act. Maybe you will render a separate rulebook regulating work from home, but it is necessary to still stipulate these key provisions in the employment agreement. Also, what is probably important for us to stress out is that it is quite difficult in a situation. I mean, you cannot basically force employees to work from home because if employees already have employment agreements that stipulate that they are working from the business premises, Serbian law does not recognize a possibility for you to unilaterally oblige employees to work remotely. That means that if you would like to change their place of work, you would need their consent in that sense when they're executing this annexed employment agreement. Also, it is, of course, up to the employer whether you're going to introduce the remote work for 100% of agreed working hours, or whether there will be, for example, that employees are working 2 days from the office and 3 days remotely. So you should actually regulate the manner in which employees are going to apply and, so to say, register that they're working outside the business premises of the employer. When it comes to the obligations of the employees, their obligations in this sense do not differ very much from the obligations of those employees who are working from the business premises of the employer. So they're still obliged to respect all the general and individual acts of the employer. And of course, to respect the additional provisions that were agreed, additional obligations that were agreed regarding their remote work. So that is basically the obligation of the employees. And what is also necessary for the employers to have in mind is that when employees are working from the business premises, it is a lot easier to communicate any potential changes in general acts or any other changes in work organization. So it is necessary to organize a manner in which you are going to inform the employees who are working remotely in timely manner if there are any changes that affect their employment status. Those employees who are working remotely have basically the same rights as those employees who are working from the business premises of the employer. And although it is not that spread in Serbia in practice, but employees who work on the same job position should have the same basic salary. So any changes that you would like to make in regard to, for example, 2 employees working on the same job position, those changes in their income should be made through increased salary for work results or for bonuses and so on. So in that regard, the law stipulates that those employees who are working remotely cannot have a lower salary than those employees who are working on the same job position from the business premises of the employer. Any differences in the rights and obligations of those employees who are working remotely and those who are working from the business premises can be made only if they're justified. For example, employees who come to business premises of the employee every day, they're entitled to compensation of expenses for commuting to and from work, while those employees who do not work from the business premises each day, who are not obliged to come to work, they are not entitled to that full amount of compensation, but only for those days that they actually come to the business premises, because for those days they do have an additional expense. So as I said, only if it is justified, you can make the difference between these two categories of employees. Since the employer is obliged to regulate the manner in which the work is being supervised during remote work, it is necessary for employer not just to regulate the manner in which the supervision is going to be conducted in sense of privacy protection of the employees, but also it is necessary in order to protect the business and confidential information of the company. So many employers stipulate additional provisions regarding the manner in which employees should act when it comes to usage of company equipment, and also, for example, stipulating the obligation to have protective screens so that no one can look what you're doing on your laptop, to pay a special attention, for example, when they have meetings, if they cannot assure privacy, then not to mention any names or any confidential data, to have special passwords for their laptops, so not anyone can access the documentation that is on their laptops. So it is necessary to regulate both of these issues. As I said, depending on the exact job position that employee is engaged on, you can regulate the manner in which they're going to file reports and the manner in which you're going to be introduced with the scope of work that has been conducted, and if the tasks and targets that you as an employer set, whether they're fulfilled or not. Of course, if employees are requested to work remotely during the official business hours, so regardless of their place of work, there are also different systems that allow you to track whether they're, so to say, online during the business hours or not. Since employees are working on the equipment that is provided by the employer, we also usually stipulate in the employment agreements that the employee is obliged to inform the employer without delay in case there are any problems with the equipment. So in case the employee cannot work for a certain period of time because of any kind of problem that exists with that equipment, so that it can be solved in the shortest possible period. Due to the whole political situation in which Europe is currently, there are a lot of Russian and Ukrainian citizens who are coming to Serbia and who are conducting work in Serbia. So there is an issue with providing the appropriate workspace for those employees, because a lot of companies, especially IT companies, tend to switch to that remote work, so hybrid manner of working. And this is another question that has been raised, whether foreigners can work remotely or not. And it is our opinion that there is no difference in that regard when it comes to Serbian citizens and foreign citizens, so they can both work remotely. But of course, it is necessary for the employer to, for the foreigner, to have a registered place of residence, because it is necessary for obtaining the residence permit and later on the work permit. The only significant difference between these two categories, so foreign citizens and Serbian citizens, lies in the fact that foreign citizens cannot spend more than 6 months outside of Republic of Serbia if they were granted with the work permit and residence permit, because if they spend that much time abroad, their work and residence permit is automatically being cancelled. So that is why it is necessary for them to stay in the country, even if they're working remotely. Another question that has been raised by our clients is whether Serbian citizens can work abroad and whether they can be granted with the possibility to work remotely but outside of Republic of Serbia. And it is our opinion that when it comes to remote work, employer should not really care about the exact place of work of the employee. So you should not be interested in the fact whether the employee is working from a coffee shop, whether he or she is working from their flat or from hotel or from any other place. And in that regard, you shouldn't be interested in whether they're working from any other country outside Serbia, because that will only cause additional legal implications and problems if you would explicitly regulate that you are familiar with the fact that someone is working abroad, especially having in mind that a lot of us, even when we go on our holidays somewhere abroad, we're usually working. So in my opinion, it is basically the same situation that does not require to be separately regulated. And last but not the least, when we are talking about employment termination procedure of employees who are conducting work remotely, it does not differ from the termination procedure of those employees who are working from the business premises of the employer. So the procedure of termination remains the same, again, depending on the basis for employment termination. So you still need to collect the evidence, you still need to prepare all the necessary documentation, but the only difference that exists refers to the manner in which you are actually submitting the papers on termination to those employees who are working remotely. So basically, in terms of Serbia legislation, you should always submit employment documentation to the employee personally in the business premises of the employer. And if that is not possible, then you're obliged to send that documentation to the place of residence that employee stated when he or she established employment. So that only prolongs this whole procedure because it takes time for those papers to be received by the employee, then for you to get the response, and then to conduct the whole procedure in line with the law. So as I said, the only difference which refers to the time it is necessary to conduct this, but there are no other differences in that regard. So that was a bit about this legal framework. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the experiences of our colleagues, panelists.
Yes, thanks a lot, Yelena. So that's a very thorough overview of the sort of legal framework that allows companies to behave in. It gives them whatever freedom of action they might like. So with the roundtable portion, we're going to ask some people who are actually working on the business side what sort of experiences they've had with remote working and hybrid working. The first topic is employer obligations for remote work. And my first question is to Biljana. So in your company, how are you monitoring remote work and maintaining communication with your employees remotely? And what sort of challenges have you found with doing that?
So I think it's going to be very similar to some of the points that Yelena already mentioned that are suggested to the employers to do. The way that we work with the employees kind of changed throughout the situation with pandemic because, we've been in lockdown first, then we had some flexibility in our work afterwards. And now most of the companies are actually going back to full office work. In our case, we are not still in the full office work mode. But what we have seen, working and actually has been the most impactful way to keep in contact, obviously, is having regular meetings with the staff. So this will depend on the type of task that they are doing. So, depending on the complexity, also depending on the seniority of the people involved. So the meetings could be daily huddles, weekly meetings, bi-weekly, really depending, it's not one solution for everybody, but having regular meetings all of the time and keeping in contact with the employees has proven to be very essential, not only on the side of what we call control, right? But also on the side of giving support to the employees and keeping that communication alive and keeping that sense of unity and belonging alive, because this is a very fine balance between control and support, right? It's not just that we are interested in looking at what their each task is also making sure that they have communication from the other direction also coming in, so that they have the feedback that they need to do their job. So this is mostly how we basically did it through the meetings. And actually, I had some feedback mentioning the control and support. This is particularly important for new joiners and for junior staff. With them, you really need to keep in contact. And I actually had a comment from a team member in relation to the topics in this webinar, is that they appreciate actually this control that we do have, which is the regular weekly meetings or a couple of meetings throughout the week, because that keeps them in the loop, keeps them informed, and help them do their job. So they need to have the feedback, right, to know what they are doing correctly or incorrectly, in some cases. And apart from this category of the new employees, the other category that would, I'd say, require more supervision in this way are also, the employees where you maybe have some challenges with performance. You do create performance plans and then you need to follow up. And this is the place where you need more control. Now, in the situation that we are kind of coming back to the office, this is possible to be done not only through meetings, also through physical presence in the office, depending, on the structure of the office and what you have available. What we used before on the technical side, let's say, is we do have some tools that we use for registering time and tasks performed throughout the day of every employee. Another technical one is what Elena mentioned. It's basically we do use Teams, so you can see, the status of people being there, present or not. You have regular meetings. You can see whether they are attending or not. In addition to that, when we come back to the offices, and we are starting to do so, you can physically see who is in the office. And additionally, we do have like a desk booking system, which is, one way to organize the space that you use, but in a indirect way, also a way to see, the presence of the employees within the office. So this is kind of a part what we've been doing. Also, what we defined throughout the pandemic is kind of core working hours, right? The availability of the employees is expected within certain hours in accordance with what our business is, right? When our clients are most active. And now we are still keeping that. Obviously, who comes to the office, they normally work within the office hours, the standard 9 to 5 in our cases. And what we've also planned to do, which is not really a control thing, but it's more a unity thing, is now that the situation is improving. Yes, we are looking forward to having some team buildings finally again. We are opening up, right? Before that, it was really impossible to do that. And we realized that there are so many people that physically do not know each other. It's really difficult to have a sense of belonging and, let's say, some type of solidarity. If you do not know the people, if you have not met them and similar. So this is a very, let's say, indirect way of making sure that the employees are engaged and fully committed to the work. But it is one of the ways, that kind of works. And also on coming back into the offices, we are almost towards the full capacity of the office now. We are going towards that. We really want to go back on checking. Well, first of all, we want to define for the cases that I mentioned, so specifically for new joiners and maybe somebody who has some issues with performance. We want to define a minimum number of days, let's say, present per week or per month. This is something that can help. In these cases, you are going to obviously give different let's say, options to the people of different seniority. You do not need to have a senior person in the office, let's say, 3 days a week. this is something that we want to discuss with the employees before we implement it formally, because as Jelena mentioned, there is no way that you can force somebody to work from home if they do not want to. And there are different circumstances in everybody's personal life, which we now really do need to take into account. But this is one of the things that we wanted to implement, and also make sure once coming back to the office and throughout all this period that all our information security controls are still in place and are still being applied in the same way in the office and also at home, to the extent that this is doable without breaching the actual privacy of the employee. And that is a fine balance there. So there is that part on, monitoring the performance, controlling the performance of the employees and presence at work, performing their tasks. But there is also that whole part of them being following the policies that we have. And one of the most important one in today's world is that safeguarding the privacy and the integrity and availability of the data that we process for the clients and for ourselves. But maybe we can talk about that a bit later. That was in general for our company what we did.
Thanks very much. So my next question is basically a pretty similar one to Maria. So what are the sort of challenges you've faced while doing remote working in your organization, or any weird things that have come up when moving over to that?
Well, being also the legal and legal in-house counsel, I can only talk about two aspects of these challenges. First, from the legal point of view, and second, from the organization point of view. As we all know, not so long ago, remote work was more than an exception than a rule. And now I think that firstly, from legal point of view, when with the start of COVID pandemic, there were a lot of legal uncertainties which would impose on in-house counsels and obviously attorneys and outside counsels, especially in Serbia. In the first days of pandemic, there were a lot of legislation pieces, mostly bylaws, and particularly in the area of employment, that were adopted by the government on daily basis, some of which were unclear, some of which were would contradict to one another, and really lawyers and employers were kind of uncertain as to how to implement all of these bylaws and legislation pieces. As you remember, in Serbia, there was a state of emergency imposed, and employees were not allowed to work from the office. So they were forced basically by the government to organize themselves and the employers to organize work in home office, because employees were not allowed to leave their places of residence. And as Jelena already explained, since the remote work is actually governed and fairly clearly explained and stipulated by the employment law in the terms of the requirement of having the agreement signed with an employee for homework, or the annex to the employment agreement stipulating all of the required conditions and terms and conditions for this work. We've come across and faced a logistics problem in this regard, pertaining to the actual physical execution of such annexes and contracts, because employees were working from their home offices, and they could not go to the office and sign the annexes and all other documents required for home office in that period. So it was a bit tricky and complicated for us to basically comply with these legal requirements. And obviously, apart from the apparent benefits of this remote work, such as that there will be no more commuting by the employees, that the employers would make significant savings on office costs, etc. From organizational point of view, obviously there were issues and challenges. Biljana also already mentioned, such as the tracking of employee performance from the one side, and from the other side, trying not to go over the red line in terms of respecting privacy. Then the staff and employee morale, because basically employees would be isolated in those periods of remote work. The effect the remote work would have on employees' actual performance, whether the performance would be increased or decreased, then losing connection or basically detachment from the company's organizational culture, and as already mentioned before, more complicated organization of home office and monitoring of employees' work performance. I mean, the monitoring and surveillance of work performance was the trend that was always available as a legal option to the employers. But now, with the work model shifting 100% to remote work and to home office, this basically opened a new perspective in this regard.
Thanks very much, Maria. I'll just a quick announcement that we're having a slight problem with Biljana's camera, but she's still there, so don't worry. My next question is to Lana. So you are based on the more of the financial side. So firstly, I wanted to ask if there are any tax implications related to remote working, and then secondly, basically the same question that I asked the other two, which is that what are some of the experiences you've had in remote working at DXC?
Thank you, Ben. Actually, I would first like to say that the DXC technology actually is one of the first companies that implemented remote work officially. And we are market leader in advanced digital workplace services. So for us, it was actually, we were treating our employees like customers. So it was not so difficult for us to do that. But actually, we faced this tax implication later on because the plans to go virtual were made before this pandemic. But then over the night, we were forced to go virtual. And then we actually saw that it works. I mean, this plan that we want to implement for the new way of work, it was working. We implemented this business continuity plan, and actually before that, there was the kind of risk to make decision to implement virtual work. But then when we faced this pandemic, we were testing it in live, and then we actually realized that it works, and then we made the really detailed plans how to implement it. So, you know, thinking that remote work is just to give the notebook to your employee and to send him or her home, it's not like that, you know. So you need to be sure to manage this change because it is also cultural change. Also, people are really reluctant to actually accept to actually this change. Most of the people are reluctant. So first we need to really to to have a very actually good plan how to go virtual, because actually the reluctance to change work habits is a barrier to technology-enabled organizational change, which is virtual work. So when it came to the implementation, I think it is maybe interesting to say, because we really did it in practice. So, you know, so this is really in real life how it looks, because business runs faster than, than legislation. So, but actually, first the segmentation was done of the employees. And I have to say that DXC Technology has 130,000 employees in 70 countries, and 90% were planned to go virtual. So it was really a very big change for us. And what I can say is that it works, and it works very well, because the company planned it very well. And actually, we segmented the employees based on their job description on 3 categories: physical, flexible, and virtual. Physical assumes that their job description requires presence in the office. So for them, there was no change. And it was maximum 10% of employees. Then the other category was flexible, which means that people are asked to come to office minimum 1 day of work or maximum 3 days of work, because based on that, we planned the number of working seats. And virtual, this is the 3rd category. So those are the employees that are supposed to come to office once a month or for some regular meetings, you know. So actually, based on that, we actually redesigned the office space. We redesigned actually the number of workplace we need. And of course, it had implication on many aspects of business. First, I want to say that the companies are not doing this for saving. So because it is a misconception that companies are going virtual to save on rental space or something like that. It is true that there is some saving, but of course there are some new costs that you have to cover, like compensation for work from home, so which Ellen a little bit tackled. So it is not about saving, it is about implementing actually the new way of work, implementing the actually technology-enabled organization of work. So it is different story. So actually, when we faced with this, then we have to make employees in Serbia to sign the consent that they want to change their actually their way of work. So because it is mandatory, as Elena said, and the employees were really questioning themselves whether, so is it good for me? Who is flexible? Who is physical? You know, so the common questions appeared. But of course, it is very important that management is managing this well, because after we started officially to work from home from like 1 year ago, people were really exciting about this because of this flexibility that is actually offered. And I can tell you that most employees, if you offer them to go back to the office to traditional way of work, they would refuse now when they experienced. But I also have to say that we really have a very good support, a very good organization and connectivity, and the tools that we use. And it was very easy. You know, we had some tool that you can order what you need to work from home, because, you know, to have the seat and to have actually everything you need in order to do your work seamlessly and actually securely. Of course, on the other side, there are some risks on the organizational side, but we can speak about detail later. But regarding tax aspects, I have to say that in Serbia, the legislation was not ready for this massive change and for this switch to work. And during the pandemic, the companies were unofficially working virtually. So it was not like that you change working contract and to implement it officially. In DXC, we have implemented officially. Even JPM helped us to prepare these working contracts. So for us, it is official way of work, and we are not going to change it in the future. Regarding tax applications, there were many questions. You know, when you give these assets to employee and the assets is used from home, you need to have a proper tracking. Where is the company's assets? And especially when some company, because in IT industry, we have a high turnover. So in all companies in IT industry, and then what happens when company when some employee wants to leave the company, how the assets will be returned. Are we going to accept all the assets, because some assets are for personal use and you don't want to reuse it with some other employee? So a lot of questions appeared, and we needed to actually check this tax treatment of this actually. And I can tell you that, not to bother with details, but most of that was a taxable benefit. And even transportation, for example, when you have a transportation from work to home, it is mandatory by law. But for physical employees, it is easy. It is 100% actually acceptable. But if you have virtual employee who will come 1 or 3 days during the week to office, and you have monthly subscription for public transportation that is fixed, you cannot pay it per day, because even if it is more expensive. So the companies are practical in this regards, and probably they are accepting to pay this tax that is actually imposed on this kind. If you have a flexible employee and you need really to document every day that person come to office, it is really administrative burden. So the companies would rather pay the tax rather than to have some strict evidence of every day that someone come to the office.
Wonderful, thanks very much. So now I want to move on to the topic of hybrid working, which is obviously similar to remote work, but I think when we were discussing building this webinar, as one of you said, it's not really remote working that's the future, it's hybrid working. So with that in mind, my first question is to Yelena. What are your views on the legal framework currently on remote working? I know you did a thorough presentation at the start, but yeah, what are your personal views on it? Do you think there are ways it could be clearer to employers and employees?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do think that the law regulates mutual rights and obligations regarding this remote work clearly enough. The problem appears when we come to the interpretation part, because we have the competent ministry that has one understanding of the legislation, the courts that are rendering decisions that have completely different stands in this regard, and that is something that really makes it difficult. But from my point of view, it is very clear that you need to stipulate these additional points when it comes to the rights and obligations of both parties. But there is also one very significant loop, so to say, and as I saw one of the questions, it refers to that, and it's regarding the safety and health at workplace. So basically the main question is, when someone is working remotely, and if something happens to your employee while they're working remotely, is it considered to be an injury at work, or is it considered to be injury outside of workplace? Because the obligations of the employer differ depending on the actual place where the accident and injury happened. In my personal opinion, since the employer cannot control the place of work that employee chooses, I really do not think that it is the responsibility of the employer. And I would consider that as injury outside of workplace, because you could potentially define it as injury at work if it was caused by the working equipment. But since I do not think that anyone will get injured by a laptop, that is why I think that in most cases it will be considered, and it should be considered, as injury outside of workplace. But again, we do have different interpretations of legislation that regulates safety and health at workplace. But as I said, if something is not under control of the employer, then I think that it cannot be the obligation of the employer to cover any expenses in that regard. So in my opinion, it is regulated clearly enough. But as we had this situation during the pandemic, we have a lot of different instructions from the competent ministry and their interpretations that actually are the ones that, in my personal and modest opinion, cause this potential confusion.
Wonderful. Next question to Maria. So we've obviously been talking about an increased movement towards hybrid working. As someone on the in-house legal side, What do you think are some of the implications of this in terms of what your workload might be going forward?
Yes, well, I would have to repeat what was already mentioned by Jelena. The most, and by some of our public, the most important matter in this regard is health and safety at work and how it is governed. And yes, I would agree with Jelena that the ministries and inspections during the state of emergency and pandemic were kind of causing confusion between among the employers in this regard, because many of you probably remember the guidelines for safe work from home that was issued by the Labor Ministry. And basically, it kind of implied that the injuries occurring at home might be shifted to the employers being responsible for this. So yes, I thank Jelena for clarifying this matter. But as she already mentioned, the actual lawmakers and the inspections and other government authorities could give the final say in this regard. But we've had experience with the agencies who perform work of health and safety at work, and they are also unclear completely on this matter, and they would implement guidance to employees regarding safety and safe work from home. But as I said, there isn't enough clarity, and that is the main legal implication of both remote and hybrid model of work. As already mentioned also, whereas on the other side, the employment law is clear on home office, although with some deficiencies, because the employment law does not make a distinction between home office and work outside of the employer's premises. In my view, hybrid work is not clearly recognized as a separate work model. And there were different interpretations. What is the legal grounds for implementation of this work? Whether it is the employment contract or annex, or could it be some general decision or rule book regarding the hybrid work? So it's just that these things still need to be, I think, completely clarified for us in-house counsels and employers. The second legal implication in this regard is cybersecurity. You know, when people are working from home, employers are dealing with unsecure home devices, unencrypted file sharing, open home Wi-Fi networks, and so on and so on. And even with the VPNs, virtual private networks, firewalls, antivirus programs, even a very elaborated remote working security policy, still, and even training, still people are the biggest security risks to any corporate network. Basically, the human factor is the biggest risk of all. And that leads also to the next implication that we may mention is the data privacy. So we mentioned surveillance, monitoring employees' productivity, using work time trackers and other apps that monitor this employee activity. Then there are wage and hour laws, compensation and home office expenses, payment of commuting expenses already mentioned. Further, then there is a question if an employee adopts a hybrid model, if an employer adopts a hybrid model after the full remote work, can employees be mandated as in-office work? Whether this could be considered as a benefit or a perk for the employee, or is this something that should be highly and strictly regulated by the employer and using legal grounds such as employment agreement? Then there are also uncertainties as to the right of employer to visit employees' home office in order to check the security and maintaining of a secure workplace, or checking the performance of employees, and how employees should agree to such personal checks of their home workplace, and how that aligns with data privacy requirements. So this is just several legal implications. I think the most important, just to name a few, which we dealt with in the last couple of years.
I'm sorry, Joe, if I may.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Because I just saw a couple of questions, and I just wanted to clarify to all the participants that a hybrid model of work, so remote work, has to be agreed between the parties. So that means that employee may request to work remotely, but the employer is not obliged to allow it. Especially if we have the employment agreement that stipulates that from the beginning that your place of work is from the business premises of the employer. And also, if I did not make it clear enough regarding the foreigners, so basically foreigners can work remotely. It's just that they can work remotely in Serbia. But if they work from abroad for more than 6 months, then that means that their work permit is going to be cancelled, as I said. So I just wanted to clarify on that.
Could just out of interest, could you work abroad for 5 months and then work in the office in Serbia for 1 month and then move away again, or something like that? Would that be a way to?
Well, it is the stated 6 months continuously, that
Right.
is the condition for your work permit to be cancelled. But you could have potential problems if you would, let's say, work 5 months abroad and then come back to Serbia for 1 month in the example that you mentioned, and then go back abroad again. Then you might have problems with your residence permit. Not that it is going to be cancelled, but the question is whether the next time you apply for prolongation of the residence permit, they might reject you because of that reason, because you did not spend the proper amount of time in the Republic of Serbia. So that is the only difference, so to say.
Fair enough. Okay, next question is to Lana. Do you think that some form of hybrid working is the future of business? And if so, yeah, why do you think that's the case? And if not, why do you think that's the case?
Well, actually, when we speak of the future of work, so it is very difficult to say what will happen. I mean, so because I saw some reports from 2020 conducted by Society for Human Resource Management, and they are saying that 80% of jobs that will exist in 2030 have not been invented yet. So it is only in 8 years, so 85%. So me working in actually IT company, I believe in this power of fourth industrial revolution, and I believe that it is true. So for me, this is not surprising. So for someone, this is exciting. For the others, it is actually frightening, you know, because, but you know, if this is true, so let's say that maybe this is true. So we really need to adapt to these changes that will happen. And when we speak about future work, it means that we need to know who does the work in the future, how the work is done, and when and where work is done. So those are three questions that gives the answer, but it is really very difficult to say. So I can say that what I feel is that the type of work engagement will change. So, and the employees will be more entrepreneurs rather than employees. So, I mean, the way of work that we work now, so this is, for me, this is just the first step, remote work or hybrid work. There is the legal distinction, BIS2 for employee, it is more or less the same, but this is just the first step in the massive change that will happen on the labor market. And actually this power of fourth industrial revolution is both exciting and frightening. And not all employees and not all people will be able to adapt. And what I think, as I'm actually economic expert, I think that unemployment will be more social than economic issue, because the people will give up. I mean, so because actually the skill set that is required, so is something that everyone needs to do, reskilling, upskilling, to answer the new requirements for doing their jobs in all industries. It is regardless of what is your job description, because the changes are quite massive. So to say what would be the future of work, the better answer would be we don't know. We can only estimate, you know, but the changes will be massive for sure. And of course, as I said, the business is running faster than legislation. So the legislation will need to adjust to this, what business is already doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're certainly in a state of profound change in many ways at the moment. So yeah, like you said, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. No one has a crystal ball. So the final topic, we're a little bit pushed for time, so we might have to go through this one a little bit quicker than the other ones. But my first question on the topic of privacy issues is to Biljana. And sorry, you've been quiet for a bit, and we haven't asked you a question for a while. But the question I had for you is, did you see the privacy issues inherent in remote or hybrid working as a major issue, or are the protections that are already in place enough to prevent any major privacy issues arising, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, it would depend on what type of controls you have in place. So, you know, what is there in the organization. What we do, and I'm assuming a lot of bigger companies do, is in this time, it's a must. With GDPR, with everything else, you do need to have information security management system. Whether you choose to get certified against a specific ISO standard, normally from the 27000 series, which are, you know, information security based, or you just choose to implement a certain standard without certification, maybe doesn't matter that much. What is important that you do have actually a good system in place to be able to make sure that there is, well, we cannot say no, because there such thing as zero risk doesn't exist, but minimum of chance of certain data being either deleted or leaked or unauthorized, well, changed in an unauthorized way, sorry. So this is what you do by implementation of, let's say, 27001. And in addition to that, 27002 probably. Well, as far as I'm aware, looking at, well, we are talking about data privacy. So that's kind of information security plus an addition for personal data, right? Is the same principles of protecting the information, just adding special requirements for data protection given, you know, prescribed by GDPR. So there is another standard, if I'm not mistaken, it's 27701, which is specifically for data privacy. So this is the recommendation for all the companies. Implement the controls and make sure you audit them. The risk that I see that you mentioned is that auditing the evidence and making sure that the implementation is still ongoing and it's being, you know, well managed, it's a bit more difficult when the people who are supposed to implement it are working from home. And obviously, we all mentioned there are limitations to how much you can invade somebody's privacy in their home to check what they are doing. So that is a place where things tend to fall apart. So security awareness is a big thing. Trainings, retrainings, awareness sessions, have them all the time. This is what we do. Still, even with that, what's going to happen is some incidents from time to time. We would like to believe that it's avoidable, but it's not. And what's important when such things do happen, you need to manage them appropriately. Fix them, analyze them, learn from them. Make sure you have a good register of them so you learn for the future. So in my mind, yeah, depending on what you have, the more basis, the stronger structure you have, and more you take care of employees being aware of it and it not being something on paper, but being alive in their daily activities, more chances you have that you're not really going to have big issues.
Wonderful, thanks very much. So the next question is to Maria. Do you think that business leaders are happy with the possibilities available for monitoring their employees' work? Would they like to do more, or do you think they are sort of happy with what's available?
Well, I think that from my point of view, the surveillance of employees in remote work does not significantly differ from office work. I mean, the GDPR and the local laws have always allowed for some sort of surveillance and required transparency in this regard, requesting the informed consent of the data subjects, in other words, employees. And obviously, employers can conduct surveillance and always could, and that was always legal, entirely legal in 95% of the cases. And regardless of the place of work, employers could always, for example, impose GPS tracking, right to access company-owned equipment and applications such as Outlook and other communication apps, which contain business correspondences. So, unlike the period from a couple of years ago where working from home was mainly concerned and pertaining to freelancers and contractors and consultants, now more and more employers and employees actually shift to this model, either to flexible, hybrid, or remote, because the benefits are mutual both for employers and employees. So I think that the data privacy measures are, I think, at the right level, both for employers and employees.
Wonderful. All right, so we are nearing the end of our allotted slot. So I thought I would get Elena to close us out with some comments on from the legal side on the privacy issue and what companies might need to know in terms of. I know you mentioned it a bit earlier before, but yeah, if you could provide some closing remarks on privacy issues and concerns in Serbia.
Well, as Maria and Biljana, I think that they already mentioned all the important aspects of these privacy issues. I would just like for the end to keep it short and just to stress out that the employers should always have in mind whether the control and supervision that they're imposing is justified or not, and whether it can be done in less invasive, so to say, manner. So if you can track the employees and track their work by, as Biljana mentioned, some kind of reports, then I do think that it is completely unnecessary to do the tracking of their presence at a particular place by using any other means. So that is basically it from my point of view.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much to all of our distinguished panelists for joining us on this session. Thank you also to everyone who is in attendance today. I hope you enjoyed it. As I just put in the chat, this recording is going to be available at the link I provided over the next few days. And hope to see you all next time. Just to remind everyone, this is a Legal 500 and JPM webinar. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thanks a lot.